Anyway, 15th century. So you, for whoever is listening to TUFS now, you missed 15th century of textual transmission right now. Fast forward, 15th century, the Kena was discovered. In the 16th century, L text was still there. Kena text was lost for some reason, and Pierre Pitou, who had 4 manuscripts in the 16th century of the L family, somehow managed to lose this as well. It should be important to say that he was not Catholic, and being in Paris in the 16th century while not being Catholic was sometimes a problem. And he actually had to escape, and only narrowly escaped with his life in the Bartholomew Night. Yeah. So it's all right that he lost 4 manuscripts. Instead of the 4 manuscripts, we actually use editions of the 15th century that say in their preface that they used these manuscripts, and so we actually use them as a surrogate for manuscripts. And in the 17th century, the Kena was rediscovered. So it was found in Cologne, went to Venice, then from Venice it went to Croatia, and it was rediscovered in Croatia as well. It was long debated if it's correct or not, if it's not a forgery, and there are a lot of forgeries of the Satyrica out there, especially in the 17th century, but it was quickly seen that it's correct Petronian material, and now since the 17th century we actually have the first time 1/3 of the Satyrica for the text as it is in existence right now. Here you can see what text is transmitted in what family, and here this is actually very, very interesting. Giton is supposed to be have been raped by Ascyltos, and are 2 characters of the Satyrica, but in the L tradition, but in the old tradition, the oldest one, it looks like a paterfamilias was actually successful in raping Ascyltos. Yeah, I know, I said it's sex and crime in ancient Rome. But it actually does make a difference to how we interpret it and how we read the text. And just imagine to read the Satyrica in the 12th or maybe later in the 14th century, then you have a complete different picture of what Petronius actually does. And just imagine you read the Satyrica without the Kena Trimarconis, you would actually underestimate Petronius' style and skill level vehemently. I always think of Petronius as the Mark Twain of Latin literature, and the way he actually managed to switch into different styles. The testimonials, the witnesses we have for the text are, of course, manuscripts. Here, the oldest manuscript that is partially in Bern, partially in Leiden, and then a younger manuscript from Austria, which is a humanist manuscript, and that is a standard witness, I would probably say. But we, as I said, we also use editions. And this edition here is a very interesting edition. It's a Paris edition of 1575, because by producing the edition, one codex arrived later than another one. So, and this codex is actually lost. So what they did for the first 1/3, they put all the different readings of the other codex in the appendix of the edition. And this is the only reason why we can actually differentiate between 2 different codices that are both lost in the 16th century. So only this is pretty much the only remain of the lost codex. Both of them have been lost by Pierre Pitou, as I said before. Then we have a weird thing about book numbers in some references. References also give us a good deal of information about the Satyrica. Servius is the only reason that we know that Encolpius was probably started his journey maybe in Marseilles. It's not really certain, but this fragment actually shows us this. And this is one of the few manuscript fragments that give us book numbers. And here they say it's from book 15. The book numbers are most likely wrong. I've seen many, many manuscripts where they say out of book 1, out of book 2, and so on. So I wouldn't rely on the book numbers in the manuscript in order to estimate how much of the Satyrica is lost. And as I said before, we have self-references, and the self-references are important because they point to a plot that is now lost. Ego summum plot. But in the descriptions, if you actually would follow the descriptions and would build a stemma, and actually in the Tusculum editions, they actually print a stemma as well, you would get something like this. Before the 16th century, everything, you have a little bit of confluence, a little bit of contamination going on, but everything is fairly simple. And then in the 16th century, because of the losing of the codices, this happened. So we can't produce a stemma, and if you can't produce a stemma, then it's always very, very difficult to produce an archetype, and if you can't produce an archetype, it's very difficult to produce an original. So that's why I think that if we deal with it a little bit more from the mathematical side and actually try to undermine our decisions, what is a light failure and what is not, then we can probably come to a better result. Normally it ends in a text critical edition, and that's the one taken from my PhD thesis. And yeah, and you can clearly see all the flaws that go with the paper format. So I tried my best to do everything with typesetting and have lots of additional information by using the cunning use of a little bit more distance or something like this. But a digital edition always has the advantage that you don't have to do something like this. You can be very, very good in the referencing exactly the paragraph you want without creating an artificial white space. Yeah. As said, one of the main reasons I came to Leipzig is so I can actually digitize Petronius manuscript. I know of roughly 2,200 folia that contain Petronius material. Some of it is, of course, also grammar, ancient grammars, or where I know that the margin notes contain Petronius text, and I'm also interested in digitizing that. So we have roughly 50% completely digitized, 23% is temporary to damage. I say temporarily because I hope that some of it can be restored. Among those 23% is also a manuscript that has been almost has been destroyed by the catastrophe event for the Cologne city archive, and that built the subway. The archive was completely sunk in, so we actually have lost quite some manuscript in that. So digitized image of a manuscript is always more difficult to lose than a physical image. 20% we have difficult negotiations. I want name and shame here, but it starts with V and ends on Etican. And 7% is excluded, which is mainly older French translation of Petronian material that are only included in the folia anyway, because I knew that there was a more complete Satyrica in the 16th century in France. I wanted to see if they contain more information about the plot. They don't. So they're the Austrian. So I said, no, we're not going to digitize this. 50% is actually better than it looks because we have the main players involved. Bern and E-Codices, a lot of German libraries, the Austrian national libraries, the French are on board as well. Leiden is difficult, but they also put themselves in. We do have the images for scientific use, but for everything else we have Creative Commons licenses. So it's, but Leiden is unfortunately very, very important, so it's time. Okay. Oh, perfect. That sounds very promising. Yeah. What you do after you try to find all of them, you put them into a collection, and this is of course not a CTS collection. This is just my spreadsheet that helped me to then create one collection, which also helps me to actually get an overview about what are the different signals used in the different editions, because they're not always the same. And one very interesting manuscript is here, this one. No, it's not on here, unfortunately. Anyway, I will come later to that as well. I'm not going to talk about this. And then you try to put it up into a site collection, a CTS collection. And we use pair sites. Of course, you could also use the architecture that is behind the Homer multitext. Yeah, it's pretty much an exchange of knowledge anyway between these two different institutions. And it's often quicker to get hold of Bridget, and I often like to bug Bridget about it, and then talk with Neil about the actual textual transmission, or where to get the best beer in Worcester. Yeah. And we do nothing fancy. We do pretty much the same thing you guys are doing. We're marking up regions of interest and try to annotate them accordingly. So that is the transcription part of thing, but I want to talk about the transmission and text part a little bit more today. And that is, so you can clean the transcriptions by comparison of different versions of the text. That is particularly important if you work with students who do not know Latin, yeah? And who helped actually, who try to transcribe text by not any help at all, or by at least looking at the pair series text or any other text, if they really don't know what's going on. But it's very, very important that you have some kind of double keying. And if you have then cleaner manuscripts, you can actually compare the different manuscripts and produce a variant matrix of Leitfehler or Leitvariant. I don't like the word Leitfehler very much, because it's much more a Leitvariant than it is a Leitfehler.
You might explain what light means, it being German.
Ah, true. So light means to lead. I mean, the English word lead and light the German word light are etymologically connected. So Leitfehler is a mistake, a Fehler, that helps you to decide into which manuscript family a certain manuscript belongs. And you use very, very bad terms. You use Leitfehler and contamination, which also sounds very bad, because everything that just makes the manuscript transmission more muddy and more difficult for scholars is bad. Nowadays, you actually try to talk about Leitvariants instead of Leitfehler, and confluence instead of contamination.
Thomas, English is much more compelling, and they refer to shared sin as much better than contamination. Shared sin being the Leitfehler.
No. Contamination is a bit like the English royal family. Yeah?
German family.
That's true, they are German, so I can say that. So, and then you can actually put the variant database and implement it into a machine learning environment. I chose Wecker, and eventually this machine learning environment can maybe help you to create stemmata, or at least substemmata, and also maybe score the manuscripts, or help you to score the manuscripts, and then you can express the score to the reader of your data as well somehow. Wecker is an open source data mining software written in Java, and it has a nice graphical user interface. I mean, it's open source, so it doesn't look fancy, but it's very usable, and it's a collection of machine learning algorithms for data mining. So you can actually use which machine learning algorithm works best on my data, and it's a data mining. Ian Witten, the guy who actually is the head of Wecker, always says data mining is an experimental science. Actually, it's a lot of human computing. So you see what's going on, You try to make sense of the result. You adjust your algorithm a little bit, and then you make sense of your result again. But it can actually do quite a lot of things for textual transmission. Although Weka is very powerful and, as I said, industry standard for data mining, classifying the manuscripts will still be a challenge for Weka. The reason for that is we only have 60 manuscripts. That's like 60 instances for data mining software. But we have a huge number of attributes. And that are all, you can either say all the words contained by a manuscript, everyone is an attribute, or you can say all the variants we have is an attribute. And so you have a very, very broad but flat environment, data set, and that is very, very difficult to classify. Also for the machine, not only for the human being. Weka works with ARF files, and once you actually have a sample of all your variants and put it into place, you give the name, what the different attributes can be, and then you have the data. And that's it's just an attribute relation file format, and it also works with XML. So there's an XML version of it, which is called XARF instead of just ARF. So they have funny names in New Zealand. But it's pretty straightforward. And I said that we have a graphical user interface, and here I just work with a sample set, and I have 3 different classes that are marked by the different colors. I have the different I have the attribute, and I have the different forms the attribute can have. So here it can either have cum, num, it can be omitted, or it can be cum. And down there I can see how actually this this variant is spread out in the manuscript family. So I have here the Florilegia, I have here an O manuscript, and I have here the 2. I have here L manuscripts in blue. This, with a little subset, I just did some visualizations for. I can see how the variants fall into place and what variants are very good to be a light failure or not. So I can actually look at all the variants quite easily and decide better, just visually better. Or what I can also do, I can try to use Weka to help me to find variants. So Weka actually has some algorithms that find out which attributes are redundant, which do not help to decide into which class something goes, or which attributes actually are very, very good to decide in which class you actually want to classify something. And here I have omnem and omnium. That is a mistake that could potentially also be considered as a light failure by a scholar, which has to classify. And I have he's and e's, which often doesn't. Often scholars would disregard this H instead of another I as a light failure. But it actually is very, very good. And I actually would still consider this as a possible light variant that helps you to decide into different language families, especially if you look into the digitized images again, and you see the enormous difference between his and ears and how it is written actually makes a lot of sense. It's not an important mistake, and it's not an important variant for the meaning of the text. Doesn't change the meaning at all, the second one, but it can still help to differentiate into different manuscript classes. And if we train with the data, we always assume that we know which class it is, and then we let Weka do its thing. Here's a naive bias, which is just a probability algorithm, and it classifies 78% correct. It's always good if you compare it with other benchmark algorithms, and they're very, very easy benchmark algorithms where you can say the computer just tosses a coin all the time, and if your accuracy is under this costing a coin, then you don't have to follow this algorithm at all. And here's the funny thing. So it's alone on the if you use a number of different algorithms, Weka always has a problem with the O class. So here is a sample size. The mistake might go away after a while. But the problem is that Müller, who is most influential for actually telling us into which manuscript family a manuscript belongs, says that he looked at the Renaissance manuscripts. Some of them he already saw in a collation, and although Beck thinks that the manuscript that is now lost, and he hasn't seen with his own eyes, thinks that, and Beck has seen it, thinks that it's probably from the 12th or 13th century. Konrad Müller says it has to be one of the humanist hands, and it's clearly late, but it always falls a little bit out of place. And if you then click on one of those links, you can actually see it's exactly this manuscript that is misplaced. And so we actually do have an odium philologicum going on between Beck and Büchler and Müller, and this is sometimes not helping. This is biasing the result. So what we actually have to do is to revisit and see and rethink what is going on by revisiting all the manuscript, doing new transcription, trying to find the variants and see what the computer thinks. I mean, all three scholars always think that this is a mathematical approach. They pursue the light variant as a mathematical approach. So if we then do it mathematically and their equations do not add up, then there must be something wrong in the process. Yeah? And so that is my work on Petronius. And now I jump a little bit and say what I'm actually doing with students. I should say again here that 70% of my students are majoring in computer science. And they don't even have a classics minor or something like this. Sometimes they don't even have any Latin. Germany does have a number of high schools that offer Latin and ancient Greek, but most students often do not have any classics knowledge. And in their project report, they actually mention it. So this paragraph, all of it, means we don't know Latin. So German is a very wordy language. So nonetheless, I like to teach textual transmission in computer science department because it actually teaches critical thinking. It shows century-old strategies for information transfer, for information preservation, shows things that do not work. Put all your manuscript in one place and try to guard it, doesn't work. It's a very risky thing. Yeah. Distribute it as widely as possible and make a lot of copies of it, works very, very well. Yeah? And strategies are for referencing information, because if you actually work with the manuscript itself, and you suddenly have conflicting information of what you see in the canon and what you have seen in the manuscript, then actually you have a data management problem which you have to resolve somehow. That's again owes to Athens or goes to Newcastle, I think, because you have a very good system for that. And it works with a series on lectures on textual transmission, and I also show some digital tools. I offer some projects that may or may not have something to do with Petronius, but the students can also do their own projects, completely up to them. I try to, in the series of lecture, I always try to show what's out there, and then they can pick and choose their own tools that they use for their project. And important is the facilitation of peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer review. From the first week onwards in the lecture series, I make them transcribe certain manuscripts and I make them work together. And I make them discuss which reading is correct, which reading isn't correct. And yeah, and they really like this and they learn a lot about Latin. This is a transcription from the first, or two transcription of two student transcription after the first week, after barely an introduction into paleography. I think I talked 20 or 30 minutes about the different paleography, and it's from the same text, and then we can compare that and we see where they differ, where they make common mistakes. Common mistakes are always bad for the correction process. As long as they make mistakes that are different from each other, we can actually correct that. And after a while, they actually continue and then they go on and then produce very good XML transcription. They also choose, to some extent, their own XML format. So it's very, very free flow. I want them to actually be full in control and learn more about the method itself than that I want to use their work directly later. You know? And this were the students that had a paragraph on why that they don't speak Latin, that they can't understand Latin, but they're very, very happy to learn a little bit. And they came up in the end with a complete code alphabet of the manuscript pages. They actually had an abbreviation alphabet. They used the Persis text and group discussions and so on to actually figure out what all these different abbreviations mean, and they came up and yeah, they posted it. They have it in the XML header as well. Work is often done out of the semester, and some of the groups started Facebook secret groups on Petronius on how to transcribe, which I found amazing. Yeah. In which they also, I mean, in their project report, they also have to tell me how they organize their workflow and how conflict management is done and how they actually work. So that was really nice. They use everything. They use Facebook, Google Doc, all kinds of things. What this made me learn, and what also the Homer Multitext and the work at the Holy Cross made me learn, is that citizen science actually works on all kinds of skill levels. So it's no matter if I deal with the youngest people or the oldest, with people that know no Latin at all, or know a little bit of Latin, or know very, very much Latin or very much Greek, I can engage everybody if they think that they produce something of value, and I can engage everybody in a way that they learn something and that they continue their knowledge. And while they're doing that, contribute to human knowledge, and even if it's just a grain of sand and the beach of human knowledge. So that's the end of my talk. In the end, I can just say enthusiasts wanted, no skills needed. Of course, you're all experts, but you can still drop me a mail if you want to. Thank you very much.
Very much. I think we can all see a lot of overlap and echoes between the work that we do and the work that you're involved in. Now I'm going to invite Rebecca Finnegan to come up to give her corresponding talk. Rebecca is a senior math and classics double major here at Holy Cross and our vice president of the Manuscripts, Inscriptions, and Documents Club. She's writing a senior thesis with Professor Smith on mathematical diagrams in manuscripts of Euclid in English, Latin, Greek, Latin, and Arabic.
So, manuscripts are studied for many reasons. The material contained in them, how they are constructed, the watermarks on the page, etc. However, scholars often simply overlook the diagrams because they either do not understand them or because they have no interest in them and so little is known about how they're constructed. But these diagrams are just as important to mathematical documents as the words. They yield further proof of the mathematician's work and can make it more understandable for the reader by painting a visual version of what the words are actually saying. An analysis of the diagrams gives readers a fuller sense of the mathematics, and like the text, one can presume that a stem of sorts can be constructed using them, but is this actually possible? Euclid is one of the most influential ancient Greek mathematicians. Little is known about him other than the fact that he flourished in Alexandria around 300 BCE. His Elements, which contain 13 books on geometry, was used as a basic textbook soon after its initial publication. In it, Euclid compiled proofs and ideas in a logical order so as to prove that they all followed from 5 simple axioms. His works were one of the first to be translated into Arabic from the original ancient Greek, and he, as an author, is well represented across texts written in many languages. Knowing this, we can look across language barriers to see something about the transmission of the diagrams themselves. It may be tempting to assume that diagrams are copied blindly from one manuscript to another, even between different languages and writing systems. If this was true, it would be quite simple to create a stemma from the diagrams across languages. Recent scholarship has suggested different ways of thinking about this concept. One such article by Charles Burnett talks about how scientific manuscripts are transcribed from Arabic into Latin. He brings up some interesting points about how the Arabic diagrams are drawn backwards to what we are used to. This makes sense since the Arabic writing system goes from right to left rather than left to right. However, because the Arabic number system still goes from left to right, the diagrams could have very well followed suit in the way that is normal to us. Burnett also says that the labels on the diagrams are Romanized. But what does this mean exactly? Is it done alphabetically one-to-one, or is it done by matching the closest sounds to one another? In order to find out, I turned to my own research and looked at two manuscripts containing Euclid's Elements, a Greek manuscript housed in the Bodleian Library at the University of Oxford, and the Arabic 2484, an Arabic manuscript housed in the National Library of France in Paris. In looking through the entirety of the Dorval 301, as well as Codex Bodmer 8, a Greek manuscript on the works of Epimenides, it is clear that the diagrams come secondary to the main text. The Bodmer 8 manuscript has diagrams for around the first 30 or so folios, and then blank spaces in which each proposition where the diagram should have been drawn. This shows that the text was written first, with approximate spaces left for the diagrams. It is unknown as to why the scribe never finished his diagrams. The Arabic manuscript also lends itself to this idea. In the very first book of the Elements, propositions 3 and 4 have spaces for diagrams left within the bodies of their text, as you can see in the picture. The first one is for 3, and the second one is for 4. In the space within proposition 3. So the circle and the line are for 3, and the two triangles are for 4. And then down in 4, there's just a square down. The physical diagrams are both drawn in the space within proposition 3, and well, there's a space for 4, which includes a scolion, which by paleographic evidence seems to have been added later. In looking at these manuscripts, it became increasingly more evident to me that we have to take on a more nuanced view than that the diagrams were just simply blindly copied. This idea led to questions of method. What kind of comparisons can we do, and what can we draw from them? We can pull up the same diagrams from the Greek and Arabic manuscripts and see how they compare. In symmetric diagrams, such as in proposition 1.25, the labels seem to travel in the opposite direction in the Arabic as they do in the Greek. So if you look, there's alpha, Arabic, this is the A, this is the B, and this is the C. So one travels clockwise and the other travels counterclockwise. However, by looking at diagrams which are not symmetric, we can see that in fact it is the diagram itself that is mirrored in the Greek one with labels in the appropriate places. A good example of such a comparison can be found in proposition 1.22. As you can see, the diagrams are drawn in opposite directions. So the big circle's on one side, and the nearest it on the other one. But if you look at the corresponding labels, each matches up with the appropriate letter in the alphabet. You can see the alphabet again. A, B, C. The delta is on the outside of the circle. And D is on the outside of the circle. The epsilon is on the line. The fifth letter of the Arabic alphabet is on the line. And so forth within the circle. However, the sixth letter of the Greek alphabet is zeta, so it makes sense. One major theme throughout the Arabic manuscript is this tendency to skip the sixth letter of the alphabet, which at first seemed odd. However, the sixth letter of the Greek alphabet is zeta, so it makes sense that the Arabic scribes would skip ahead to Zayin, the seventh letter of the Arabic alphabet. Thus, the Arabic scribe skips the sixth letter in his own alphabet in order to accurately match the Greek labeling system. Once we have verified that the figures are structured similarly and that the labels correspond, we want to know if they correspond to the same things in the text, so we can also match up segments in the text of these propositions and check for inconsistencies between the diagrams and across the two languages. To do this, I compiled a list of every time a reference to the diagram was made within the body of the text for proposition 1.22, which is the circle diagram that we looked at. They are easy to find as they are marked by bars over single letters and do not involve any sort of ligatures. So that's what it looks like in Arabic, which is helpful because I only know the alphabet, but I'm actually in Arabic. Upon completing these lists, I noticed that the two texts use the diagrams in two completely different ways. The Greek refers to both points and line segments, but the Arabic only ever refers to the line segments. It was also interesting to note that the Arabic diagram contains one more label than the Greek diagram does, which contributes to the different ways that the diagrams are referred to in the text. These differences would be hard to explain if the scribe was simply blindly copying one manuscript to another. Going back to the original question, is it possible to make a stemma for the transmission of diagrams? One recent piece of scholarship says yes, it is possible, and that a manuscript stemma can be created from the diagrams alone. While this article puts forth many good ideas in order to reach this conclusion, it may be a bit of a stretch. The conclusions overlook some important facts. Most importantly, diagrams are drawn into the manuscript on at least a second pass. This means that the diagrams may not correspond to the correct time that the text was written. Also, the conclusions rely on the fact that only one manuscript is used when making another, and this is not true. A scribe can consult more than one version of a text when creating another version. This means that one cannot use a rigid structure of one manuscript following from another and so on to create a stemma. Through the examples I have been looking at, the creation of the diagrams can be seen as a scholarly act similar to the creation of the text. And the same arguments that lend themselves to pursuing diplomatic editions of the text also apply to the diagrams themselves.
Thank you very much, Dr. That's excellent. Now, thank you to our two speakers who have opened it up to questions. Professor Smith, our advisor, is going to moderate that.
And I've been asked to make sure you record. We have an audience at Tufts, so if not elsewhere, so make sure you repeat everything.
Okay, right.
In front of the mock.
Got it. So both speakers have generously agreed to take questions. Would anyone like to direct a question to either speaker individually or just any broader issues that they have raised that you'd like to ask either or both of the speakers? Nick.
You said that students take these texts and compare it to
Yes. So, yeah, I know that is a stretch, but I know that when students learn how paleography works, the original, in the very first beginning, the original might help. Especially, there wouldn't be any other way of finding out what the abbreviations actually mean if you wouldn't have an understanding of the text itself. That said, we have one example where we have a P with an underline, which of course could be pro or pri, and they didn't even know that, they wrote pro or pri, and then later on they decided for the right thing that was pro because it came up often enough that they could actually make this decision. So it's an entry, and it helps definitely. So that you do need this only works if you have a text in some kind of an edition that is accepted, and then web pages like the Closest project. It wouldn't help for lots of other problems you are dealing with, but it's a different skill set.
Remember to repeat the question. That's okay. I chatted it in.
Perfect. Thank you. So,
Other questions for either Rebecca? Right.
So you said that the sixth letter of each alphabet is skipped. When you were talking the sixth or seventh letter, when you're talking about.
Question is going to be about skipped letters in the Arabic alphabet corresponding to Greek alphabet in the diagrams Rebecca was talking about.
So the Greek alphabet goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then in the Arabic alphabet, it goes 5, and then they skip 6, and then the 7 is the Z letter that corresponds to zeta. So they skip it so that the zeta and the zeta.
So they were matching with more of the sounds as opposed to the order of the numbers.
Exactly. Most of the order happens to be the same, and so alpha, aleph, beta, all fine. But then when you get up to that 6th letter, they're out of sync. And so the Arabic jumps down to the 7th Arabic letter because Zion has the same sound as Zeta. So there's something. Oh, Professor Martin.
Is it all right to ask one question of each?
Yes, you're permitted.
Did I understand you say that in the Arabic diagrams, the points are not labeled?
Right. So not in the diagram, but when I
Just
So the question.
It seemed very interesting. I'd just like to know more.
The question
about it.
concerned the absence of labels for points in the text.
So I went through Proposition 22 in Book 1 in both the Greek manuscript and the Arabic manuscript, and I wrote down all the instances of where you can see the bar labeling the segments. And in the Arabic, it was always a line segment, so it was always at least 2 labels, unless it was referring to 1 of 3 lines,
Right.
and then it would be 1. But in the Greek manuscript, it was a bunch of the time they would just refer to a point. It'd be like, this point is, and then they'd say the segment after.
Do you have any? I have none. Are there any speculations about why this difference?
I just started looking at it this week, so not yet, but maybe in the near future.
It sounds like there must be some.
Yeah.
Secondly, Thomas, you said that for the Petronius, in the absence of some manuscripts, you're using early modern printed editions. Is that
Yes.
And I take it it's the case that if you have the early modern printed edition, that is it in its introduction, does it say where the manuscripts were? I ask because I've had some experience trying to do this with Josephus, where early printed editions can, in a very difficult way, serve as a guide to manuscripts or manuscript traditions that we no longer have.
Yeah.
But it's been almost impossible to know exactly what they were talking about on the one hand, because modern designations don't exist yet. But then secondly, is it true that there isn't therefore really any way to calculate or index the, what's the right term, the faithfulness of the early modern edition in representing the manuscript? Because my impression, at least in the Josephus ones, is that they can be quite interpretive in trying to put together, a text that's quote unquote good and that somebody will buy.
Yeah, that's true to some extent. The only thing is the same, almost a similar criterion could be made for the manuscripts itself that are also interpretive of them. So differentiating between editions and manuscripts is very artificial. And some textual transmission families, editions can serve as a surrogate. In the case of Petronius, we have actually very, very good preface that actually say, we have gotten this manuscript from Cuyacanus. We know a lot about de Cuya and about the cycle in Paris. We know that every person who edited in Paris the Petronius edition used one or less the same manuscripts, and they all got it from Cuya. And in the end, P2 lost all of them. Yeah. They not always have the same name, but because they have similar readings and similar variants, and because they're both pointing to similar circumstances of how they got the manuscript, you can actually line them up. So if this wouldn't be the case, then P2 would have lost more than 4. But because we can actually condense the 6 manuscripts that I actually mentioned in the different prefaces of the early modern editions, and we can actually say that 2 of them are actually overlapping, probably the same. P2 only lost 4, or kept 4, or whatever he did with the 4 manuscript editions. So it's a case-by-case basis.
We could ask similar questions about diagrams, because I know Rebecca's been looking at maybe the most influential early edition of, or translation of Euclid into Latin by Christoph Clavius, this famous German Jesuit mathematician. And in the sort of title page of his edition, he boasts about the fact that he's created new diagrams. So he's translated them in the same sense that he's translated the text into Latin. And
I have a question to Rebecca.
oh yes, you're allowed to ask questions too.
Yes, yeah. And
the microphone.
Okay.
We're getting up to 100 views now of these DCNE lectures. So we're getting, these are actually, the record does get noticed.
Oh gosh. Okay. I have a question combining what I try to do with vector and machine learning and what you actually just set out to do with the diagrams. And I know of all the hundreds of Euclid manuscripts that are out there. How would you actually note, or do you have an idea how you would note the features of the different diagrams in a way that is machine actionable? I know it's probably a very unfair question, but if you have an idea, yeah, let me know.
We were talking about it now.
So it's every of this sketches, everything of these drawings has different features.
Right.
Do you think you can describe the features in a way that it's machine actionable, in a way that a computer can actually compare it without actually doing an image comparison? So is there a way how you could actually encode the different features of the diagram so you can then process all the 400 Arabic manuscripts and all the 300 Greek manuscripts and so on of the same diagram and try to figure out what who copied from who?
I've been looking, well, just like this past week, especially at like the labels and the segments that I was talking about, and I attempted and didn't get very far because it was really complicated to compare the segments to each other, and I tried to make a CSV file of like which ones matched up. It was very difficult when I tested simple.
So what she's doing with the labeling is actually quite original.
Yeah.
The article she referred to by Burnett looks not at encoding absolute features, but to relative features. So it's almost like reporting variance.
Yeah.
And so you look at essentially things like the kind of topological integrity of the diagram and a couple of kind of mathematical properties you can compare and say, you know, are they similar or different?
Yeah.
And that's the approach he was taking in trying to suggest how to automate schematic analysis.
So is the 7th instead of the 6th letter, is this a variant or is this?
I think
Is this
this
is this a variant or is it a translation? I mean, you said that the Arabic manuscript used the 7th instead of the 6th. Do you already know if it's true for other Arabic manuscripts as well? So what I'm interested in, is this a variant you have to note down or is it a translation?
This is only Arabic manuscript so far, so I'm not sure if it extends more broadly, but I assume it would.
I think we're going to find it's a translation.
Yeah.
You're all welcome to continue the conversation over refreshments, and please do help yourself and join us. And let's join me in thanking both our speakers one more time.